Hey Mini enthusiasts, how you doing? Hope you're all well and I hope you're having a great day. There's quite a lot of bits to get on with today, just gaskets and getting the engine ready to go back in. So I'll talk about a few bits quickly. Obviously the timing chain cover, you'd have seen I took that off in the last episode. That's all been cleaned up. That's been sprayed now, along with the front pulley, and the nut has all been cleaned and sprayed as well. A few people ask me now and again, what spray paint do I use for stuff like this? It's just Hammerite smooth spray paint, just because it can go on bare metal. It gives quite a good finish. Does take quite a long while to dry though, that's the only thing I don't like about it. And in cold conditions, you've got to make sure you're not spraying it below sort of 10 degrees, because it just doesn't dry properly. We've also got the cam followers I've got ready to go back in. We've got a new front timing chain cover, front pulley oil seal. I mentioned in the previous episodes about the timing chain cover gasket, so I've actually bought a genuine MG Rover one now, and I've got the two. This one is a genuine gasket, this one's a pattern gasket. As you can see, same shape, but they look a little bit different. The material's completely different that they're made from. The genuine one obviously feels like a better quality. It's kind of double-sided, so it's almost, well, I don't know, different colour either side. Whether that makes any difference, I don't know, but I assume it's different materials each side. And it also has this sort of silicone rubber seal around here, which you don't get on the non-genuine ones. So I don't want to risk it. I'm going to fit a genuine one because I really don't want it to leak. I mean, that was £2.50, I think, so I'm not too worried about losing £2.50. The genuine one's about 9 or 10 quid though, so it's quite a bit more expensive. Right, question for the viewers, because I know there's some very knowledgeable people out there. First off, the front pulley is different to what I'm used to seeing on a 1275, so it doesn't look like it has any, like a harmonic damper on there. Next question is, on the front timing chain cover, obviously you have your timing marks there. What is this bit? I've always wondered. It almost looks like it's a mount for a crankshaft sensor, but of course this is way before electronic wizardry like that. So what was that for? Was it some way of setting top dead centre? Was it some sort of timing mark or something? I noticed there's slit in the pulley. I've never really looked that hard before. Oh, it does correspond with that. Is that some way of locking the crank maybe? Maybe if you inserted something down through there, that would hold that front pulley. Yeah, I'm interested to know. Let me know. What do you think? Right, so the first thing we've got to do to this timing cover is fit a new oil seal. I didn't film taking out the old oil seal, but you have to be careful taking it out and refitting it, because it's quite thin metal this, and you can damage it and distort this where you take the old oil seal out. So I actually got a socket which pretty much fitted perfectly around the oil seal, and just gently, I didn't go mad on it, just gently tap, 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 and it eased it out. They can get quite stuck inside there. So that socket actually is a hub nut socket, which is a 1 5/16, but it fitted perfectly inside there, and I was able just to tap it through and get it out. The tricky bit is getting the new seal in, and I've found in the past it can vary here. Some of the seals can be quite tight to fit back in, some can go in quite easily. This one feels quite nice and squidgy, so we're going to put a bit of rubber grease on here just around the outside just to help it go in, and we'll also put a bit of rubber grease just on the inside, and the reason for that is when you first start the engine up, and for that first sort of 20 seconds of running, there will be no oil on this seal, so if it's dry, it can quickly sort of damage that seal. So a smear of sort of rubber grease on there. One, it won't deteriorate the rubber, and 2, it will just give it that first sort of protection for the first sort of 20 seconds of starting it up. Now hopefully we'll be able to push this gasket in by, or this seal in by hand. That's kind of, if you can, that's the way you want to do it. And this one, like I say, is quite a nice fit, and with a bit of grease I'm going to be able to push that in by hand. Ideally, yeah, you just want to do it by hand. You don't want to have to tap the seal because you can damage it. But if you're lucky like I am, that seal isn't going to take a great deal of persuasion at all. And obviously we know it's home when it's sitting flush at the bottom. That's gone in really, really nicely, that has. I'm pleased with that. Like I say, just a smear of rubber grease around there will just give it a bit of protection when we first start up. Right, so I think we're ready to go on. As you can see, I've already fitted the new tensioner pad. I'm never quite sure how much to tighten these up because it's adjustable this end. What I usually do, and what I've done this time, is I usually just do it by feel. When you take it off, you'll see some witness marks where obviously the oil darkens the colour of the metal. So when you take it off, you can see the position it was last set in. So generally, with a new pad on there, if the engine's not been apart before, I'll go with roughly where that was, but I generally just pull it over, apply some pre-tension on it and tighten it up. I can't see I've seen anywhere where it says there's a specific setting for doing it, but please do let me know if you do know of one. I've always just done it by feel and never really had a problem with it. But if you're not sure, you've got the old witness marks there you can use. Next important bit is not to forget this shield at the front of here, which is got a big F on it, which stands for front. Don't get it the wrong way around, because if you do, what it ends up doing is mashing up the inside of the casing. So that goes on that way round. Now the next bit, I don't want to teach you to suck eggs, but when it comes to fitting a new gasket, if you don't want it to leak, you've got to do the dirty work and the prep work and get it right, because it's really important. So the gasket faces that are joining together have to be perfectly clean, and I would say they need to be chemically clean as well. So I use a bit of magic spray, bit of brake cleaner. That will get rid of any grease and oil on that gasket face, because if there is any grease on there or anything like that, it will stop the gasket sealer sealing, and you'll get leaks, guaranteed. So it's always worth really sort of taking your time to clean off the old gasket, making sure that you've got a nice, clean, dry and oil and grease free face to seal back up to, and on both sides, on the cover and on the engine. So I'm satisfied that is nice and grease free now. We have got our new gasket. Always just make sure it is the right shape. Now I did mention this gasket has like a silicone rubber between the bolt holes. I'm not sure whether you're meant to use gasket sealer on these, but I always have done. They commonly leak around the bottom here, obviously where the oil sits. So I'm going to use some gasket sealer as well. Now I get quite wound up about gasket sealers sometimes, especially instant gasket, where people use it and they use way too much of it, and you can see it oozing out the sides, and it can cause problems, because when it's oozing out the sides like that, it can break off inside the engine, and then bits of it get stuck in the oil strainer at the bottom, and you lose oil pressure, which is not a good thing. You can also, I've seen it quite often, is they put too much on, it will fill up these bolt holes. When you put 2 bolts in, it'll ooze out, fill up these bolt holes, and then you go and put your bolt in and you tighten it up with gasket sealer behind it. That can actually cause hydraulic lock, because you know, gasket sealer is a fluid. It's not very compressible, and you can crack heads and crack blocks and things like that just through sheer hydraulic pressure. So that is why you always blow out and clean out like bolt holes, especially like head studs and things like that. And I have seen this where people have left some oil or something like that and they've not cleaned out a stud or something like that, and they've put a bolt in and they've hydraulic locked it, and you can crack the thread. So a couple of important bits. One, use decent quality gasket sealer. So I always use this Loctite. It's SI 5980 quick gasket. It's not, I'm not sure what the compound is. It's not like silicon sealer. It certainly doesn't smell of it, and it takes quite a lot longer to dry. But the good thing is this is probably about 2 years old, this gasket sealer. Is it just doesn't dry up and harden inside the tube. Now these are like pressurized tubes. They're quite expensive, but they are worth it, because you'll buy a tube of gasket sealer for £5. You use it once, you come to use it 6 months later and it's all gone rock solid. This stuff, provided you put the cap back on, won't harden. Now, really important bit, before you apply it, just get rid of the top bit first, because that could have semi-hardened. You don't want a bit of semi-hardened gasket sealer in there. And then the good bit about this is it's really controllable because it's in a pressurized container. And like I say, you just don't want to go too mad. If I go around a bolt hole, I always go inside of the bolt hole rather than outside. When I worked at Nissan, and I'm sure lots of modern cars nowadays, they don't have gaskets. The gasket is a liquid gasket. It will be similar to this. It will be like a silicon based sealer. So it doesn't have a gasket at all. You just use a sealer. But they're very, very specific about the size of the bead you use and how much gasket sealer you use. Just making sure you don't, over or underdo it. So we've got a small bead on there. It's probably about 2.5 mil, 3 mil bead. All the way around, continuous. Like I say, don't go mad and put too much on there, because it will just ooze out and end up in your oil strainer in the bottom of the gearbox or sump. You do not want that. And like I say, great thing about this, cap back on. I'll come back to that in 6 months' time and that will still be good to go. Now the next bit, again, is quite important. Make sure that the pulley fits on freely, which it does. Make sure your woodruff key is in and located properly. Now, we want to find a couple of bolts to put in. Quite important, this plate, some of these bolts that go through are really small. Can you see that? It's a fine thread and it's a really short bolt, which means you can't apply too much torque because it will just rip the thread out of these holes. But it's quite important to get this cover centralised on the pulley, because there's movement in these bolt holes around here and the cover can move around in various positions. What's important is it's centralised on the bottom pulley, and we'll show how to do that in a moment. I've just got to get a bolt or two prepared, making sure I get the right bolt for the right hole. There we go. Let me just grab a spanner. So you've got to be careful to not disturb the gasket when you're putting it on. And what you want to do, carefully get it in place. Try not to smudge the gasket sealer you've just put on there. There we go. And you just want a couple of bolts just to loosely, very loosely, put it in place. Now this next bit is really important. Before you tighten all these bolts down, you want the front pulley on. So just a smear of lube around there, just to give it something to work on when the engine first starts up. Line up the Woodruff key. And then you allow the pulley to line up the rest of the bolt holes, because it's the pulley that's important. The rest of the bolt holes, it doesn't matter if it, as you can see, it can move around a bit. So if you tighten up those bolt holes first, you can be half a millimetre in the wrong direction. But as long as we've got the pulley on there, that'll sit where it needs to go. Now it's just a case of putting the rest of the bolts in and tightening up at diagonals and being sure not to over tighten these bolts, because like I say, these ones around the top and the back here, they're a fine thread and a shallow thread as well. So just be mindful of that. Now you might have noticed, obviously, to get the two bottom ones in, we're going to have to take that pulley off again, but we can get the rest of the bolts tightened up now, get it aligned before we take that pulley back off. Tighten up progressively and opposites. Good practice to do that with anything you're tightening up. If there's more than two bolts holding something, you always just tighten up the diagonals, the opposites. Bear with me, I seem to be missing a bolt. Found it. Right, we're nearly there. So they're all done up. So I'm not sure what the torque's meant to be. I've not got a low range torque range anyway, so they're probably only going to be, I don't know, some of these ones only 5 to 10 Newton meters. They're going to be quite low. I've just done them by hand, years of experience. I don't know if there is a specific torque setting, but as a general rule of thumb, small bolts like this, fine thread, you want to be using a 1/4 drive socket set. If you're using a 3/8 drive or something like that, you might find yourself over torquing them and potentially ripping the threads out, but use the right size of tool for the job. Next bit is obviously the nut. Again, I'm not going to tell you the torque. I will look it up, it's quite important this is torqued correctly, but each torque will be different for what engine you're running. Now, when you tighten this up, you're going to need to lock the engine somehow. Luckily, I've got the starter motor out, so we can just put a bar through the other side. Through the starter ring gear. It should be just click, that is at the correct torque setting, and off. Last bit is to knock over the lock tab to stop the nut from coming loose. I also like nice tidy lock tabs. There we go, that's our timing chain cover done with a new tensioner pad inside, new crank pulley oil seal and a new gasket. Where I was talking about gasket sealer, if you look down the side here, you should barely be able to see it. All you should just see is a very slight bead just around the outside of the gasket. If you've got a big bead of gasket sealer sticking out, you have overdone it. And yeah, if I had an apprentice and they made a mess like that, put too much on, I would make them take it off and do it again, because there should be barely noticeable. I also don't like really brightly coloured silicone seals, like when they're orange or something like that. They're really noticeable. It looks rubbish. But yeah, happy with that.